just to 9 a.m. as we continue this morning. And it's Crime Talk, our weekly edition with eThekwini Secure. We joined on the line this morning by Imtiaz Syed, the chairperson of eThekwini Secure. Imtiaz, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And as always, we appreciate you taking time out, talking to us here at Salam Media. We welcome you to the show.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me, Inayat.
Yes, now, just against the background of what is taking place in KwaZulu-Natal, and we want to talk today about getting a better understanding of disaster management. Now, I belong to one or two groups. I've been following developments and, how people obviously respond to disaster management. We know that a lot takes place in the form of providing much needed assistance, much needed aid, whether it's
Mm,
water, whether it's food, whether it's just trying to get people up and running to get their lives back on track. But the
yes.
key issue here is one needs to understand the readiness. And yeah, I'm talking about a plan of
Mm,
action where, there's unity. It's a combined plan of action. And we see that in South Africa, with some of these disasters that have taken place, that there's very little preparedness or possibly a lack of a plan of action.
mm. No, absolutely. I think where we getting it wrong is simply by saying that there's so many different people doing so many different things, and it's not a coordinated effort. So, in terms of that, we got to understand how do we now bring all of this together? And once we started doing the postmortems of the flooding, and you go back to COVID and you go to the unrest, and you start bringing all of these things together, you realize that there are so many people that are out there. It's just a matter of identifying them properly and now bringing them all together in a common understanding and a common purpose, because everyone has a different skill set. And the one thing in it that's very important to note is that we always find ourselves wanting when it comes down to human capital, people per se, right? And leadership in that speaks to saying who leads people. So ultimately, we're having those battles in our society and in our community because everyone has their own way of doing things. And we are saying that ultimately, coming through the flooding right now, that what we found is that there are many organizations, many people, many focus groups doing certain things. And it's for us as society to identify our local areas and say, these are the organizations that work within our area. Let us not wait for a disaster to engage each other. Let us engage each other now. Let's build up those volunteer databases and let's start understanding all of these things. But also, something to note, Inayat, is that we might be talking about flooding, but everything in society is now coming back to the people to start standing up. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to only worry about, a disaster or things like that. Community mobilization is the norm of today, and we're going to have to do it moving forward if we want to prosper in this country. And that's very important. No matter what troubles you, whether it's service delivery, whether it's flooding, whether it's any type of disaster, or whatever it is that's affecting society, it's time for people to stand up and start speaking out for what it is that they require.
Well, certainly, and I think this is where civil society engagement comes in. And we're talking
Yes,
about a unified plan of action, more importantly, to address the issues. And it doesn't have to be a disaster that needs to prompt the
absolutely.
type of action, or the plan that we are talking about. We see this on a day to day basis. And unfortunately, when one looks at the economic crisis we've seen, in fact, just early on, I was talking to somebody out of Sri Lanka where violent protests and people obviously prices, and we've faced with exactly the same problems. We've faced with
Mhm.
fuel prices. We've faced with power cuts, and at some point in time, something is going to give. And this is
Yeah.
where we are talking about civil society stepping up, addressing these issues, and getting the right people, like you mentioned, human capital. A huge
Yes.
shortage of human capital right now in Chas.
Absolutely. The reason I pick on this issue, and it's very important to me, is that because we sit on the different platforms. I mean, when we go to the CPF platforms, we talk about a community safety plan. You come into council and we say, how do we now community participation? How do we mobilize communities to start assisting themselves? So when we're speaking to all of these different things, we see that everyone's speaking the same language. However, they're not in the same place to discuss it and debate it and bring it to the fore in a proper way or format. And we're not going to get it 100% right. I mean, all of these things are always working plans. I mean, when you're on the ground, things change and things happen. But I'm saying at least a draft, a know-how, understanding where to go in times of disaster, understanding where to go in times of writing, understanding where you can get safety and security from. A simple thing that I brought up yesterday in the district office meeting was to say that every single area needs to identify security companies within the area and have that database so that we can mobilize them very quickly in terms of saying, how do we now progress and what is your space in terms of safety and security when it comes down to disaster relief. So all of these things are congruent in the common understanding of what we need as society.
Yes, certainly. Now, let's talk about youth and youth involvement because I think this is important. We see in many organizations, we're talking about civil society, whether we're talking about NGOs, the importance of youth and getting youth involved. And sadly, we see very few, we see a number of young people volunteering when the need arises, but we're talking of succession planning, we're talking of youth. Growing through the ranks to get involved.
As communities by far and large, and it's normal, we're seeing it all of the time, that we are creating a great divide. And that divide is going to be detrimental for the future of our youth in this country. Because ultimately, there needs to be some sort of grooming in terms of society and how society is currently in its current climate. Now, if we're not exposing our youth to the things we face every single day, ultimately, when they are faced with it, they will not be able to handle it and they wouldn't know what to do. So these are things that we're speaking to say it's not only about them being involved in order to give us assistance, it's about giving them the awareness of the reality of the climate we live in. And these are the things that are happening daily. But when we protect our kids, or in an understanding we are protecting our kids by saying, let's leave them at home, let's not get them involved in relief work, let's not get them involved in security management and safety and all of these things, we're not really protecting them. We're keeping them in this little mollycoddled room where when they are going to be exposed to it, they're not going to be able to deal with it. And that's something that's really, really, really crucial. So we need to start getting our youth involved, whether it is by taking them with us or bringing them out or making them understand that it is for the betterment of them. And what we find in all the organizations and everywhere we go, we find that people that come out are generally over 50 years old that are complaining and have issues, and people that are doing some sort of work of over the age of 40. What are we doing? Where are those kids between 20 and 40? What are they doing today? Because they're the next generation and we have no succession plan. What are we doing then? How are we going to move forward as a community or as a country for that matter?
Well, Imtiaz, Jazakallah khairan so much for that and for your time with us as always this morning. We wish you well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Imtiaz Syed joining us, eThekwini Secure. We're going to go for a break. We come back. We'll be joined by Shaheen Esop, the president of Sahuk. We're taking a look at the latest developments coming out of Sahuk. And this is the third Hajj accredited list for 1443 AH.